Hope everybody's doing well this morning. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to 2 Kings. We're going to begin in chapter 9 is where I show we left off. I was going to mention this to you while it's on my mind. I keep forgetting. We've had these for, I've done this for 2019, since 2017. It'd been the end of 2016, but I got the idea from someone, and Joyce and I will go back through files near the end of the year, and anyone who has visited, who is in our area, someone who's not a member of the church, not a faithful member of another congregation, if they visited, we will send out, and I order these magnetic calendars. I told the elders I was looking for something. You know as well as I do, a lot of times you get mail and you get something, you open it up and you go, oh, that's nice, and then right into the trash can, right? So I was looking for something that maybe would not find its way immediately to file 13, and I had the idea of a magnetic calendar. People are always looking at the calendar, checking don't forget you got that doctor's appointment. What day of the week is that on next week? And it's always handy to have a calendar. Most people, if you're like us, you have 4 or 5 in your house. Maybe 4 or 5 in one room because you're constantly looking at a calendar. And everybody uses magnets, right? So I still have some of these from like 2018 because they're holding pictures, colorings, school things, doctor's appointments on the fridge. So hopefully that's accomplishing its purpose, and at least it's got the church name on it, the little logo that we've had for several years, the address, website, and times of services. So that's the idea, just to kind of be, in people's mind. You never know when somebody may be thinking about spiritual matters, and I want the Lord's church right here in Bremen to be on their mind when they do. So we started doing that. Well, I got a better deal than usual this year when I ordered those. So I ordered a whole bunch because I had like a 60% off deal. And on top of that, I think I had a credit on my account. So I ordered a whole bunch, and all that to say, there's more back there. So if you haven't gotten one and you've seen it and you're thinking, well, I don't want to take all those because those are for visitors or whatever, I've sent all of them to the visitors. So everything back there is what's left, and I got extras just so I could give to our folks so that, if that's something you can use it. If not, that's fine. Well, I'm sure they'll get taken, but I just didn't want anybody to see that and think that they were for somebody else. But I set those out there for our people, and I'm still sending them to visitors. If a new visitor comes, I'll send one out. If you know of somebody, ask me. If I haven't already sent them one, if we can get an address, I'll send them. It's just, to me, that's just one of those nice things that you can do that people will see that. When I send it to a visitor, I send a little note. So it's the same size as the calendar. I just put a little note in there thanking them for visiting, and then on the flip side of it is an offer for a free Bible correspondence course if they're interested. So, like I said, if you know of someone who has visited, a friend or a family member, ask me. I may have already sent it to them, but if I haven't, sometimes people visit and they don't fill out a card or whatever, and I don't have a record. And if I don't, then I can't send it. But hopefully we can do some good with that small little gesture that hopefully won't get just tossed aside. Now, 2 Kings chapter 9. We left off here with Jehu is about to be anointed king. In fact, that's going to happen here in the first 13 verses. Elisha is going to send a man to anoint him, one of the children of the prophets. Elisha sends him, says, take oil in your hand, go to Ramoth Gilead. You come there, look out, Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. And so he says, when you get there, take him aside, is basically what he's saying here in verse 2, at the end of verse 2. Take the box of oil, pour it on his head. They say, thus saith the Lord, I've anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door and flee and tarry not. So this young man of the prophets, he goes and he goes to Ramoth Gilead just like Elisha told him. And when he gets there, the captains of the host are sitting just basically like Elisha told him would happen. And he says to Jehu, I have an errand unto thee, O captain. He says, unto which of all of us? He says, to thee, O captain. So he rose, went into the house, poured the oil on his head, said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. So he is, this is interesting, the dynasty here. And you remember we've talked about this several times. The dynasties in the north are constantly changing. Several different changes of family or dynasty, if you want to call it that. Here, the dynasty is moving from the house of Ahab to the house of Jehu. Ahab's family is going to be wiped out. This is a judgment from God. Jehu, you're going to see, is not a squeamish fellow. But he does ascend to the throne legitimately. God sends, through Elisha, who sends one of the prophets, and he's anointed by God to be king over Israel. He's going to do some things that are not condoned by God, but part of what he is doing is, and that is to execute judgment upon the house of Ahab. Now, you'll see this later on. He's going to use some real dishonesty in doing this. That part is not condoned. But he was appointed by God to carry out this prophecy that was prophesied against the house of Ahab, you may recall. Remember, especially when he went and he stole Naboth's vineyard. He and Jezebel, they get Naboth killed. By the way, I did some research. I never found, I can't, maybe I'm just not looking in the right source. I can't find anything about the family thing we asked about. Someone suspected. The only thing I found was one commentator suspected that maybe either he didn't have any more family or that this conspiracy may have gone beyond and actually wiped them out too, having the false witnesses say, oh yeah, Ahab and his wife and his sons, they were all cursing God and blaspheming God, which of course was a capital crime. And that's the only thing I found, and I can't even remember where, but that might have been Adam Clark. But most people just, I don't know if a lot of people have never given that thought, but I hadn't either until you asked me about that, Sister Tammy. But anyways, in particular in that instance, you recall God sent a prophet, and he says, you're gonna suffer for this, Ahab. And you may also recall, I don't know, I know that's been several weeks ago, but you may also recall that Ahab, when this prophecy was given, he humbled himself. And that's why this didn't happen right away. He says it's not going to happen in his days, God says, but it will be later on. He's going to be judged for this. Of course, Jezebel, she never even hinted at repentance. So this is involving her as well. So he's anointed, Jehu is. He says, you're going to go and you're going to carry out this judgment from God against the house of Ahab. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish. And he says, I'm cutting off the house of Ahab, all of them. There's not anybody going to be left of his family in Israel. He says, I'm going to make the house of Ahab, verse 9, like the house of Jeroboam. Remember, he cut off the house of Jeroboam as well because of that idolatry. And like the house of Baasha, whose household also was cut off. And the dog shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. Well, that's what Elisha told him to do. State your business, anoint him, tell him what's going on, and then leave. So he did. So Jehu comes forth to the servants of his Lord, and one says unto him, is all well? Is everything okay? You can imagine Jehu kind of walks out like, what just happened here? And this he's poured oil on my head, he says all this stuff, and then he bolts. And so he probably came out looking a little perplexed. And they say, hey, is everything okay? What's this crazy man doing? Wherefore came this mad fellow to thee? He says, well, the man and his communication. Those prophets. Those preachers, man, they're crazy. That's what kind of seems like what he's saying here. You know how he is. And so they said, no. Tell us. He also seems like he's reluctant to tell them, and I don't know why. He's not a squeamish fellow. Again, you see this time and time again with Jehu. But for whatever reason, maybe he's trying to work it out in his own mind or whatever. Was this just a crazy man, or is this really going to happen? So he says, the man is communication. They say, no, it's false. Tell us. So he says, thus and thus spake he to me, and saying, thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. So he tells them, well, he came and he says, Jehovah has anointed me king over Israel. And so these captains that are with him, these men, man, they haste. They take every man his garment, they put it under him on top of the stairs, and blew with trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. You recall, many hundreds of years later, the King of Kings is going to ride into Jerusalem, and for a while, at least, they recognize his kingship. And what did they do? Branches of palm trees, but what else? They spread their garments in a way, right? This is some kind of a cultural thing where it represents, I guess, ruling over, kind of, we might say, in our day and time, rolling out the red carpet, right? So it's interesting that you see something similar here. Of course, with Jesus, it was just a few days later that some of those same people are yelling, crucify him. They were expecting an earthly king. They were expecting Jesus to come into Jerusalem, marshal the forces, and let's go and overthrow Rome. And that's not what he came to do, of course. But here, they lay their garments under him on the top of the stairs, set him up on top of the stairs, kind of an elevated position. So a lot here. These men obviously respect Jehu very much because they didn't hear this and go, "You king? Are you joking? That guy really is crazy, isn't he?" No, they said he's dead on. So they put him on top of the stairs, lay those garments out, and Jehu is king. So now Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, verse 14, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept Ramoth Gilead, he and all Israel, because of Hazael, king of Syria. So this is kind of a stronghold to battle with, these kind of skirmishes were sort of an ongoing thing with Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel. Remember, he had been wounded at Ramoth Gilead. The wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. So Jehu says, if it be your minds, then let none go forth nor escape out of the city to go to tell it in Jezreel. So here's Jehu. He's kind of what we would call it like a general for Joram, sorry. And sometimes these names, and I don't know if we'll get that far today, but there's just a couple chapters over, there's two kings with the same name, north and south, reigning, and part of their reign at least was concurrent. And I thought, man, if it's not confusing enough trying to keep these names straight, when two of them with the same name reign concurrently. I guess you could go in the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom and say, long live Joash. That was his name. Or Jehoash is kind of an alternate spelling. Long live Joash, and you'd be all right in either country, right? if it was during that concurrent period. But anyway, sometimes it gets confusing. So if y'all hear me say one wrong, somebody just wave and say, no, Chad, you missed it. So he's like Jehu was like a general for Joram. He's still there in Ramoth Gilead. Joram has gone to Jezreel to be healed. And so Jehu says, don't let anybody get out of the city. They'll go back and they'll tell what's going on. So they did. They kept it shut up right there within the city. And then Jehu, he heads out in a chariot. And he goes to Jezreel. Because Joram is there, of course, recovering. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. And remember, Ahaziah is another one that he would form a league sometimes, an unholy alliance with king of Israel. But there stood a watchman in the tower of Jezreel. Now, you've probably studied this, or maybe even seen it in movies and things like that. In those days, you didn't have radar and all these different ways, so they would set a tower, and somebody would be way up in the tower, and he's a watchman. And God's going to even use this illustration in the book of Ezekiel and tell Ezekiel, you're a watchman spiritually for the house of Israel. And so, sometimes people say that. In fact, somebody said that to me one time. I was talking about something that was being taught by a brother in Christ, and he was a preacher, but it was false. What he was teaching was wrong, and it was stuff that would cause somebody to be lost if they believed that and followed it. And I said something about it, speaking out, and somebody says, well, man, who made you a watchman? Well, actually, God did. God says preachers are to be spiritual watchmen. And there's more to that than constantly pointing out error and calling people out by name and things like that. And I know some people get caught up in that to the point of going radical with it. But at the same time, it kind of is the preacher's job. That's what God has done, and that's what he's saying to Ezekiel. Well, here's this man. He's way up in this tower, and so he can see a great distance, and he sees, here comes a chariot. So he tells, he spied the company of Jehu, says, I see a company. And so Joram says, take a horseman, send to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? Well, you can't text them and say, hey, what's going on? Why are y'all coming? So, again, you're in ancient times, so send somebody out, see what's going on. So there went one on horseback to meet him and said, thus saith the king, is it peace? Well, are you coming in peace? Is everything okay? Jehu said, what do you got to do with peace? What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, the messenger came to them, but he cometh not again. So Jehu says, he basically just tells the messenger, just get behind me and follow me. I haven't seen anything as far as commentators. I've read this before, and I'm wondering, and I can't find anything to confirm one way or another, so it's just kind of my thoughts. And I'm not even saying this is my opinion. It makes me wonder, is he saying, when the guy comes to him and says, hey, is everything okay? Is he saying, you just follow me and you'll see? Or is he saying, no, it's not okay, but I don't have a beef with you, so why don't you just stay behind me here and you won't get hurt? I don't know. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. I haven't found a commentator yet that gives anything as far as most of them just say he tells them, just follow behind me here. So whatever the reason is, or however he inflects that to whatever meaning he conveys with it, the messenger is behind him. Well, back in Jezreel, the watchman is going, well, we sent that guy out, and he talked to him, but he's not coming back. He's just following him. That's obviously not normal. Normally, the guy would go, is everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. We're just coming to deliver a message to the king. Okay, well, I'll ride back and let him know. Because the single horse rider obviously would outride the company and the chariot and all that. So that's typically what would happen. Well, the watchman is saying, this is strange, and why is he not coming back? So he sends out a second on horseback there in verse 19. Thus saith the king, is it peace? Jehu, same thing. And again, whatever he implied the first time, I'm sure he's implying here. What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. The watchman is telling him again. He said, well, same thing. He came even unto them, cometh not again. Well, now they're getting closer, right? So now he says what? We talked about this just a little bit at the end of class last week. The driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. He was from San Jose, Costa Rica. So Joram says, make ready. And his chariot was made ready. I think here, again, I can't tell you 100% for sure because I don't know if there's enough evidence in the text. My thinking is that the king says, that's my top guy, Jehu. Let's go out and see what's going on with him. Something is up if he's not sending the messenger back. I don't think he suspects anything. I think he's just thinking, we need to go find out, so let's go. So they make ready, the chariot's made ready, and Joram, king of Israel, this is in verse 21, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out. Ahaziah is there. I guess Joram's feeling better at this point. He said, hey, one of my top military guys is coming out. You want to ride out with me? Sure. So they ride out. Let's go see what's going on with old Jehu. So they go out, each in his chariot, and they went out against Jehu, met him in the portion of Naboth, the Jezreelite. Boy, isn't that coincidental? No coincidence, is it? Right there in Naboth's portion, which he claimed after he had him murdered. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? Is everything okay, man? And he answered, what peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. Now, I think I have a note here. Let me see if I can find it. I didn't write it down. I don't know, and people are kind of divided. You read commentators. Is he talking about spiritual whoredoms here, or is he talking about just the lewdness of Jezebel in general, or is it both? I think based on the life and especially the ensuing events here with Jehu, I think this is probably more to do with her lewdness, literally. Because Jehu is not a super spiritual person. He's going to feign such on occasions, and dare I say, when it suits him, he'll be pretty spiritual, at least seemingly. But for the most part, and when he takes over as king and is the outright king, he's not going to follow God. So I think he's probably referring to some of the literal, physical immorality of Jezebel. And he says to Joram, there's no peace as long as she's allowed to just run rampant with all of her lewdness, her witchcraft. And it may be that even though here's a guy who's not really spiritual himself, it's kind of like today, you may have somebody that they're not interested in spiritual matters at all, but yet if somebody starts talking about getting into witchcraft or the occult or something, they say, hey, we ain't messing around with that stuff. So that might be what's going on here with Jehu as well. But anyway, verse 23, Joram turned his hands and fled. Now he realizes, wait a minute, this guy's not come for peace. He thinks it's his top general. I think there was no suspicion whatsoever from Joram. And buddy, he turns tail to run. And he tells Ahaziah, he's yelling out, treachery, you better go. Run for your life. I tell you what else he knows here about Jehu. He's a bad dude. He doesn't say, get your sword out, let's fight. I think he knows he doesn't stand a chance. So apparently Jehu, again, is a pretty tough, rough and tough fella. So Jehu, he doesn't blink. He drew a bow with his full strength and smote Jehoram, this same Joram, same person, just sometimes alternate spelling, between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then said Jehu to Bidkar, his captain, take up and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite, for remember how that when I and thou rode together after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. Apparently, when this prophecy was prophesied against Ahab, Jehu was there and heard it. So he says, remember that. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his son, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plat, saith the Lord. Now therefore take and cast him into the plat of ground according to the word of the Lord. When Ahaziah king of Judah saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house. He's getting out of Dodge, right? And so Jehu runs after him. Says, smite him also in the chariot, and they did so at the going up to Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his sepulchre with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year, Joram the son of Ahab began Ahaziah to reign over Judah. So Jehu goes now, and he's assassinated Joram, or Jehoram, same person, and now Ahaziah also. Then, verse 30, really verse 30 begin, it's going to go down through 37. This is where Jehu is going to execute Jezebel. He came to Jezreel. Jezebel heard about it. She painted her face. She puts on her makeup. Every indication here is, I don't know that I caught this before, but I did some studying, and I forget where I read it at first, and I got to thinking about it, and the more I read it, the more I thought, because what's going to happen is she puts on her makeup, she tired her head, she wraps her head up, and she looked out at a window. And as Jehu entered in at the gate, she said, had Zimri peace who slew his master? I've always taken that as her saying, you dirty fella, you have treacherously killed your master, and you're just rotten. But I tell you, the more I've studied this, I think she's offering herself to him. I think and that certainly fits with Jezebel's character, doesn't it? I mean, she would just, so the way some people will paraphrase that phrase in verse 31, had Zimri peace who slew his master, is her saying, basically putting it in more how we would say it, hey, look, if you've slain your master, Jehu, it's nothing new. It's no big deal. Zimri did that too. Almost like, I'm not here to have a beef with you. In fact, you could just take me and I'll be your wife. And I'll be right there with you as your queen. I think she's offering herself to him. But buddy, he's having none of it. Whether she's rebuking him. And if she is in fact rebuking him, that is ironic. You know, talk about the irony of, if ever there was irony from somebody trying to take the moral high ground, it's Jezebel trying to do so. But again, I think contextually and with all that you read about with her character, I think that makes more sense, that she's trying to make peace with him and say, hey, look, you could just take me and I'll be your queen and we'll rule together. I'm not upset about this thing with Ahab. Which, again, just shows you more about her character if that's the case. But he lifted up his face at the window and says, who's on my side? Who? There looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs, and he said, throw her down. Well, he says, if you're on my side, prove it. Throw her down. And buddy, they did. They threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he trode her underfoot. So she would no doubt have been dead, or at the very least mortally injured. But he runs over her with the horses, and assuming he's still got his chariot attached at this point. So, again, not a squeamish fellow. And not only that, when he's finished, you know what he does? He says, man, I'm hungry. Anybody else hungry? I don't know that I'd be hungry after that scene. But Jehu was. So when he was come in, he ate and drank. Says, go see now this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. He says, well, she is a king's daughter, so go in there and bury her. But when they went to bury her, of course, they found no more than the skull and the feet, the palms of her hands. They came again and told him. He says, well, that's just like God said by Elijah. In the portion of Jezreel shall dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the carcass of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, this is Jezebel. In other words, she doesn't even have a tombstone. She doesn't have a tomb, not a tombstone. Not so much as a place to say, here lies Jezebel. And that was a great disgrace and dishonor in that culture. Even today, we want something, some kind of a memorial, some kind of a marker, right? Says she's got nothing. And that's punishment for how wicked she was. Now, when you get into chapter 10, this continues the cutting off of Ahab's house. Jehu is going to slaughter Ahab's descendants. The first 17 verses here. Ahab has 70 sons. Of course, a lot of these kings would take multiple wives. 70 sons that are going to be killed. Jehu wrote letters, sent it to Samaria. This is in the capital city. And he sends it to the rulers of Jezreel, to the elders, to them that brought up Ahab's children, saying, seeing your master's sons are with you, there in verse 2, and there are with you chariots and horses, a fenced city also in armor. Look even out the best, the meanest of your master's sons, set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. Hey, set one of those fellas, set all those fellas that you want on the throne, get the best ones, the strongest ones, and we're going to fight it out. Let's see who's going to come out king of Israel. Well, again, what have we learned about Jehu? He's a pretty bad man. In a moral sense sometimes, but also in a figurative sense, the way the young folks say he's a bad dude. They don't want any of that. So they say, hey, look, verse 4, they're exceedingly afraid. Behold, 2 kings stood not before him. How then shall we stand? Hey, we're not stupid. We're not going to fight this guy. We are going to get whooped. So He that was over the house, he that was over the city, the elders also, and the bringers up of the children sent to Jehu, saying, look, we're your servants. Whatever you tell us to do, we're not going to make any king. You do what's right, what's good in your eyes. Then he wrote a letter the second time, saying, well, if you are mine, if you're going to hearken unto me, then take the heads of those 70 sons of Ahab. And he says, take them out. If you really are going to make good on this and you're going to be my servants, I want them by tomorrow. Well, the king's son, being 70 persons, were with the great men of the city, which brought them up. The end of verse 6 there, and then on into 7. Came to pass when the letter came to them, they took the king's son and slew 70 persons, put their heads in baskets, sent them to Jezreel. There came a messenger and told him, saying, they brought the heads of the king's sons. So he says, lay them in 2 heaps at the entering in of the gate until the morning. Do you think that's a message for anybody that might want to rebel against Jehu or trifle with him? In the morning, verse 9 says that he went out. Came to pass in the morning that he went out and stood and said to all the people, ye be righteous. Behold, I conspired against my master and slew him, but who slew all these? You see, when it fits him, he can try to take the moral high ground. He says, I didn't kill him. I mean, I did conspire against my master, but I didn't kill these people. I mean, these people in your city, they killed these 70 sons. But then he goes on and says, know now that there shall fall unto the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spake concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord hath done that which he spake by his servant Elijah. So Jehu slew all that remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men and his kinsfolk, his priests, until he left him none remaining, just like God had prophesied, because of that great, great wickedness of Ahab. So Jehu, arose, verse 12 tells us, and departed and came to Samaria. And as he was at the shearing house in the way, Jehu met with the brethren of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and said, who are ye? They answer, we are the brethren of Ahaziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and the children of the queen. And old Jehu, man, because he's Jehu, right? He says, take them alive. And they slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men. Neither left he any of them. I tell you what, a lot of bloodshed from Jehu, isn't there? When he was departed thence, he lighted on Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he saluted him and said to him, is thine heart right, as my heart is with thy heart? And Jehonadab answered, it is. If it be, give me thine hand. And he gave him his hand and took him up to him into the chariot. So by the way, you'll read about these fellows, their descendants, later on, some more of this family in Jeremiah 35. That's a whole other text that God is making a point, because these were faithful men. But he says to him, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. So they made him ride in his chariot. When he came to Samaria, he slew all that remained unto Ahab in Samaria till he had destroyed him, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake to Elijah. I didn't go through and count, but it'd be interesting to know just exactly how many times that statement is made just in this context, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah. In other words, God is letting us know, the inspired writer is letting us know by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, God didn't miss it. God doesn't miss it. It's just like God said would happen.
And look at the man that he used.
And yeah,
It's
even,
not the perfect person,
yeah,
the perfect godly man. He didn't use that godly man to do this. He used who he wanted to use to do it.
yeah, and God can use anybody. And you're going to see that later on with Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, although it seems like Nebuchadnezzar comes around. And, but you see, all throughout Scripture, all throughout history, God uses all kinds of people. And it doesn't mean that he's saving that individual. Calvinism acts like because God is using somebody in some way, he's choosing for them whether to be saved or lost. They still have a choice as far as their individual salvation, but God is using them to accomplish his purposes here, being judgment on the house of Ahab. And so closing out, well, not closing, but 18 through 27 of this chapter here, Jehu kills the prophets of Baal. And this is where he uses deceit. And again, it's recorded, but it's not condoned by the Bible. Gathers the people together and he lies and he says, well, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu is going to serve him much. So we're going to have a big party, get all the prophets of Baal, servants, priests, let none be lacking, for I've got a great sacrifice to do to Baal. Bring everybody in here, but he did it in subtlety, the end of verse 19 tells us, to the intent that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. So he proclaims this solemn assembly. He sent through Israel, get everybody here, and they did. And so he tells Jehonadab, verse 23, the son of Rechab, he says, go in there and make sure there's no servants of Jehovah. And at least he did that, but again, he didn't have to use dishonesty to do this. God was with him. He was carrying out God's judgment upon these people, but God didn't tell him to do it with dishonesty. But anyways, he goes in to offer sacrifices. Jehu, he appointed 80 men outside there, and he says, if any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he that letteth them go, his life shall be for the life of him. And people know when Jehu says something, he ain't messing around. So they're not going to let anybody escape. So he sends them in there to slay them in verse 25. Let none come forth. So they did. They smote them with the edge of the sword. The guard and the captains cast them out, went to the city of the house of Baal. They brought those images out of the house of Baal. They burned them. They break down the image of Baal, break down the house of Baal, made it a draft house unto this day. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel, which is interesting because when he takes over, he doesn't follow God. I don't understand it. Jehu is one of those kings that every time I study him, I'm sort of scratching my head. What are you doing? Because he starts off so strong and he's wiping out Baal, but he's just like every king in the north, sticking with the calf worship, aren't they? I don't know. I don't understand it. So, but because he did God's will in cutting off Ahab, he's going to have the throne for 4 generations there at the end of verse 30. But Jehu didn't take any heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart. Maybe he trusted in his military ability and his military might. I don't know. He certainly was a formidable military person, but he didn't follow God. Let me give you this real quick. I know we're about to have the second bell. If you've ever read this account in 2 Chronicles 22, you see some differences. Remember, a difference does not necessarily make a discrepancy. Sometimes people read these accounts and they say there are discrepancies, but not everything's recorded chronologically. Sometimes something is left out that's included in another account. If the other account says this is left out because it didn't happen, and then another account includes it, then you got a problem. But if he just leaves it out and somebody else, in addition, does not a discrepancy make, right? But all that is to say this, and if you want to read more about this, I'm going to summarize it very succinctly, but this is how Adam Clark, and he quotes another fellow that did a lot of research on this as far as the timeline, but it's in Adam Clark's commentary if you want to read more about it. But here's what he says. Here's how all this is reconciled. I'm going to give you the quick rundown of how all this stuff went down with Jehu. Jehoram, or Joram, the king of Israel, was killed in the field of Jezreel. And we just read about that. Ahaziah and Jehoram were together at that point, right? He says to Ahaziah, there's treachery, run. Jehu draws the bow. Joram is killed at that point. Ahaziah fled. He fled to Samaria, and he hid there. Again, they understand Jehu is not somebody to be messed with, so he's hiding. He doesn't say, I'm coming out to fight. He hides. Jehu marches to Jezreel, and in Jezreel, that's where he killed Jezebel. That's in Jezreel. Then Jehu sends to Samaria for the heads of Ahab's 70 sons, which they followed through with. Then Jehu marches to Samaria, and he kills 42 relatives of Ahaziah along the way, and he also meets Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. Arriving in Samaria, Jehu finds Ahaziah, and he wounds him mortally. Ahaziah then fled to Megiddo, and he died there. Now, if some of that doesn't make as much sense, just for time's sake, I didn't go and read all of 2 Chronicles 22. But if you ever read that and you compare it, you know there are things included there that are not included here. There are things included here that are not included there. When you put it all together, that's what you get. Jehu, he did God's will in judging the house of Ahab, but he didn't follow God with his heart. And what a shame, because God could have done such great things with a man like that, who was a man of action, a man of clear, very strong leadership ability. But he didn't follow God. So in chapter 11, we're going to read about the usurper, Athaliah. We'll stop there and pick up, Lord willing, next week with chapter 11 and read about Athaliah and Joash and Jehoiada and another really sad story here within the Chronicles of the kingdom of Israel and, in this case, Judah. So we'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week with chapter 11. We'll have a break before our worship period begins.